So if you haven't done so yet, take a second to get your episode film loaded and paused at the 0-second mark. I don't know about you, but I see the Amazon Originals on the screen with the little green.
And you should be careful. Some of these do have like an ad that starts. I mean, even though Amazon doesn't put ads during the episode itself, they are now starting this trend of showing an ad at the very beginning. I'm getting this Wheel of Time ad constantly, so just make sure that you've gotten through that Wheel of Time ad and that you are now at the Amazon Originals or right before the I'm right before the Amazon Original starts.
Okay,
you guys do get a logo then. I just want to make sure that I'm not off by like 10 seconds because of the logo.
Yeah, it says Amazon Originals.
Yeah, if you see that logo,
the same as Netflix's. Boom.
Exactly.
You got it.
I'm not seeing the logo yet, so I'm like off by maybe 2 seconds from you.
Okay, perfect. Thanks, guys.
But that's no problem.
I hope that the Wheel of Time doesn't come after this, but I guess if it does, we'll do it. But
it doesn't.
So if you've been here before, you know what we're doing next. If you're new, here's what's going to happen. Grab your remote and have your thumb on the play button, but don't press it because we're going to do that at the same time on the count of 3. Ready? 1, 2, 3.
Curry, I love how excited you sound. It makes me excited.
I was thinking Curry rocked it. Bravo, Curry. I love the contrast between the flashback and like now. It's like bright and happy in the flashback and then it's just all muted now. I love that green dress.
This feels very Friday Night's All Right for Fighting.
And Dear Emily and Richard.
Yes, that's what I was actually referencing. I don't know why I got my episodes mixed up. This is very cool.
This is so awesome.
I love the slowly backing away from the baby. Like, don't move, don't move.
I lived in an apartment in Chicago when I was in college that had the not exact, but had that same layout. Like this, I mean, this room here, that archway, the little fireplace right there, all the windows, everything. I mean, really, the next room.
I love that painting.
That transition was crazy. I need to rewatch that. Not right now, but I will.
It's such a good.
I was just thinking the same thing. I was like, can I rewind it now? That was so smooth.
Still can't watch it without crying.
Yeah, that's a really beautiful opening.
It's like
And
the
here's your
prized
cornware.
Pyrex dish.
There's your Pyrex.
She has a droll box.
Back in the day when TVs were like a piece of furniture.
And now I'm sitting here watching it on a 9-inch.
I was just gonna say he was sitting really close to that TV too.
That was the episode title in that photo.
That's right. That's the reference.
Did she move to a different apartment in the same building or to a different building?
She's in her parents'
She's
place.
in her parents, yeah.
Oh, okay. I don't
And
know why I
they're
didn't
on the
catch
next floor up, right?
So notice how the Liberace
Yes.
was doing typewriter, and now Susie's at a typewriter.
I think her parents lived downstairs from where her apartment was.
Okay, this guy, he was in something that I watched when I was younger and now I can't place it and it's gonna drive me crazy. I recognize him too.
The actor is Chaz Lamar Shepard, if that helps any.
Prunella. What was her name? What her name was Drusilla? What was it on Gilmore Girls?
Annalyn?
Drella.
And
And also Miss Celine, yeah.
Okay, the actor's been in a lot of things, but he was on Seventh Heaven for many years, if that helps anyone. Yeah, that's where I recognize.
I also
love all-
picked up on. Sorry, go on, Diana.
Oh, I was just gonna say I love all those magazines and papers and like
They're
reading them.
very cool.
Is there still a lot of those in like all over New York City, Diana?
There
It's
are
kind of a dying thing.
There are less than there were, but they're definitely around. You just have to dig a little to find them sometimes. But like they're definitely like more, well, I guess they just look a little more updated. But yeah, you can find like quote unquote newsstands, except they sell more like sodas and stuff.
I failed with the timer again, guys. The timestamp is 8:10, and I will get it going in Remarcus. I never remember to do that.
But you
You're
can
in good
fast forward
company.
it though. You should be able to fast forward it.
Oh, I know, but I just
never seem to do the Remarcus timer. I fail at that every. Just making me mad.
But it's interesting. It's like the like evolution of parenting, like what the kids want versus what the parents want, right? I just love when he said, that's why I win. Something.
Yes, I love the I win comment too. It's great.
Like my father has literally said that to me. Like, this is my house, I win.
So I always question, was that actually that kid screaming, or did they like dub that in?
That was dubbed.
I
That was
still
dubbed. Is
control
that what you said,
myself.
John?
What's up?
Did you say that that scream was dubbed in?
I don't know. I asked.
That looked fairly.
Seemed pretty
Natural.
simultaneous, yeah.
I just asked if it was dubbed. I didn't know.
Oh, I had literally asked the same thing like 30 seconds before.
I love that she's putting on perfume and makeup before bed. It's great.
I don't know about you guys, but that's what I look like when I get into bed every
Every day.
Oh, me too. The things we go through.
I mean, she's one step better than Midge, I suppose, because she lets her husband see her doing it. So, progress.
Or maybe that's just how many years they've been married. Like that's where they are. Midge and Joel were only married 4 years, so it was probably another decade before he got to see the up.
Also, notice how she's sitting up. This discussion is for her, not over.
And all of the sheet is very neatly across her lap. It's not wrinkled. Two TV set sort of man. I feel like that would be like a good memento name. So I'm guessing that her parents don't know that Joel technically already came back.
Well, no. He knows. She doesn't know, and he's not. He's not telling.
That's right. He's
Joel's
keeping
back.
it from her.
I love that we see this sequence now from her. It's so great.
This is so funny. Oh, the matching jumpers.
I was just gonna say that I love the magic cable knit sweater. It's weird to see him in the club and not outside at the newsstand.
Yeah, Bootsy, what are you doing?
Susie is my style icon. Everything she wears, I want. She just looks so cool.
Do you have the suspenders, Lee?
I don't own, I think I owned a pair years ago. I'm more of a dungaree person these days, but I really should get back into suspendered. Overalls, by the way. I say dungarees because
I
I'm
was
Irish.
about to ask. I was about to say, I've heard the word, but what is that?
Overalls, sorry guys.
That's a nice looking hat.
I really love that they complement each other in the blues and grays. Like it's a really interesting color palette for the two of them.
I think that's a ASP thing too, because she did that on Gilmore too a lot. She color coordinated it.
I am loving that hat so much.
Me too, and even Susie's hat is really cute.
The queens on Drag Race should have had Susie like helping them out when they did the comedy episode.
I love that. Well, it's up there.
Offense has been taken.
I can't stop staring at her amazing green and blue purse. I can't stop staring at it. It's so beautiful.
I was just thinking, I'm really glad that we don't live in a world where we have to hand make our business cards anymore.
Yes.
I think she hand makes them though because she doesn't have any money to buy them from a printer.
That's exactly it.
Watch the amazing richness of this scene.
I love this song.
Is this more? This song also appeared in Gilmore Girl. Miss Patty and Babette sang it.
Song's classic. It's one of the best.
I love that line.
Nerd alert.
Just a
I
bit.
feel like Nerd Alert is
Just a
much
bit of
more
an
modern.
Yeah, I was gonna
but,
say.
but I'm glad. I still appreciate its use. I like the alt history implications that Susie invented Nerd Alert back in the 50s.
Yeah, let's go with that.
Hey, she's downtown, man.
I believe that with how she has her notebooks and takes notes. I just love the pairing that they did with the casting with mother and daughter. I just think it's so perfect. They work so well.
What an odd thing to share.
That she had half her intestine out.
Yeah.
There's lots of
It's
people
because
like
they're
that.
talking about being thin.
I was just gonna say there's lots of folks that have no problem sharing their medical trials and tribulations.
Very true.
These little suitcase record players are everywhere nowadays, and I wonder if this show was part of that inspiration of them making a comeback
Yeah,
last
that
week.
like that.
That's a good
Bosley-
thought.
That Bosley one that you can that was very heavily marketed in like the last 5 years or so.
Yeah.
Don't you have one, Chris?
Oh gosh,
Like that?
We have
I had one in the 1950s Motorola big one. It's like huge. It's not small like that. And then we have 3 or 4 other record players in the house, but only 2 of them are hooked up.
I really liked that she jumped up as if she was like a 13-year-old kid who was in trouble when her mom walked in.
Yeah, and that other shot of her from above, the bird's eye view of her lying down on sideways on her bed like a teenager girl.
Yeah, it's actually funny
They're
because I was
definitely-
looking at her and I was thinking she looks so young. Like
that,
I had
was a
kind
funny
of
line.
noted that.
That was a funny line. To be truly effective, you must be ugly.
Oh God.
Who does he want as president? And these short sleeve button ups really remind me of my grandpa.
Yes.
And it never really registered why, but I mean, there we go. That's why, because that was the style back then.
Yet another time, Joel has completely ticked me off. He says, I want to see Ethan more. Nothing about the daughter, just he wants to see his son more.
Yeah.
Continuing the long tradition of children as objects.
Well, I feel like it's partly too because the daughter's a baby and he just doesn't want the things that come along with he doesn't want the responsibility. Disgusting. And the diapers and the feeding.
Cindy asked for a timestamp. It's 25:35.
Is the timer not working? I did get it.
She just sent a message.
This is our second real life person, right?
Yes, I have a lot to say.
Unless you don't count Liberace.
Oh, that's good casting.
Is that a real park, Diana?
Oh, that's 100% Washington Square Park, and I cannot believe they emptied it to do this. It's insanity. There's always thousands of people in that park.
So I'm assuming the road never happened.
Nope. Jane
No,
Jacobs
road
won.
never happened.
And also where Rory met Jess.
End of film.
I'm good. I'm calm.
I love how she just gave a stranger her stuff and she trusts that she's going to hold on to it for her.
Well, the 50s.
Meanwhile, some lady she doesn't know is watching her kid.
I was going to say the bird lady is watching Ethan.
I love that green coat. Green looks good on her.
I agree. And I like the shirt she has underneath. It's very complimentary to the coat. There's actually an error in that because she refers to pantyhose, and pantyhose didn't actually become popular until late in the 60s with the miniskirt. And in 58, women were still wearing stockings and garters.
Like, yeah. Well, I live in Queens, so I don't know how numbers work. What an insulting thing to say about Queens residents.
I personally take offense, as that is where I was born and raised.
Me too.
Ooh.
Feeling we're about to get real annoyed.
I love how it's clearly cold out, but the boy is wearing shorts.
Oh, good grief.
Wow.
What?
Yes. Penny Pan.
At least the little boy has a jacket on.
It was also very traditional, and it still is in Europe. Like little boys don't wear long pants until they're a certain age.
Oh, that's interesting.
Check out Penny's colors and Miriam's colors.
I'm assuming Daddy has bought or rented this apartment as well.
That was funny.
Methodist and brisket.
I mean, she's not wrong.
She really isn't.
Pot roasting Santa Claus.
Oh my goodness. I want my comedy notebook.
Sick burn.
Oh,
I kept hoping she was gonna throw that at.
Yeah, I'm like, why does she keep picking up these things if she's not going to break them?
This is the lamest excuse.
Yeah, super lame. Cool jewelry box.
This is Blossom Dearie, and she's got great vocal style. If you want to hear more of her stuff, that's who we're listening to.
Wasn't she? I feel like at a Friday night dinner, they played a lot of that.
Yeah, maybe. And she also has one or two songs in Schoolhouse Rock.
I love this scene.
Oh my god, I love it.
You can see her calculating in her head.
Right?
Yes, I think you're right. You're right.
I think so.
Look, check out that shot, by the way.
I need to start a count of how many coats she had. Yeah, she would rival Lorelai in that arena.
I was gonna say,
I think she would decimate Lorelai.
Google spreadsheet.
And you notice the coat,
Yes.
the coat cuff.
This would so be me.
I continue to love how much Susie and Midge kind of like bounce off of each other, despite being so different.
I love that angle, seeing them both looking through the porthole windows. It feels like two little kids that are like trying to peek at something they shouldn't be seeing.
Well, that's kind of exactly what it is, you know, like they just had the conversation where Midge has been to the Copacabana like as a guest, but Susie never could.
Exactly, yeah, it's great.
I cannot be convinced that these two aren't going to fall in love. No one can convince me otherwise.
You and I are very similarly. I'm just always, anytime I see two people getting along together, I just immediately am shipping those two.
It's very like, you know, she's very upbeat, very perky, and Susie's just, you know, a little bitter about the world, but they're very soft together. So I cannot be convinced that that's not the perfect dynamic.
But it's also a great depiction of how two women can be friends on this level.
Yeah, for sure. I'm a sucker for romance, so I'm just always wanting to see people fall in love.
But maybe great friendship is love. You know what I mean? Like,
Hey.
True.
I like that.
I think you could really, truly fall in love with your friends in a non-romantic way. I think that's some of the best relationships.
I agree with Diana. I always say the only difference between your best friends and your spouse is sex. Or I guess physical intimacy.
Does it say something about the state of our world right now that I just saw her sharing her food and
me
was just
too.
thinking, "Ooh,
Exactly.
not a good idea.
Even just seeing like crowded clubs, it's like, ugh.
Right, totally. Part of why I love this series so much is just the journey of the creative. I mean, that's just such, it resonates with me so deeply that I just love it.
And the whole process. This is the episode where it really delves into that.
Yeah, totally.
And it's true, you just have to like do it. You have to do it more, and you know like it's gonna suck for a while. And that's the only way to get better at it.
Yeah, it's hard to get over that hump of like I know I'm going to stink, you know, but I kind of have to do it anyway. That's a very difficult thing for a creative to do.
Oh, Midge is the same age as me. I don't know why I thought she was older.
I think it's the coats.
And the two children might
Yeah, children kind of age her a little bit to me.
I think the coats and those purses really age a person.
Do you feel like there was a part of her telling her mother that was also like meant to hurt her mother in that moment?
Yes, because her mother still holds out hope.
Yeah, exactly. And she knows that. So it was sort of like kind of her own anger in the moment, wanting to sort of lash out at her mother in a way.
I also think it's sort of like her parents don't seem to get it, how serious.
Yeah,
this is.
exactly. Yeah. But I think that there was a little bit of, oof, man, this is
It was like
good
weaponized.
song.
It was like a
Yes.
weaponized.
It felt
truth
weaponized.
telling.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And this song is just so good.
It's the continuation of these songs that are from the sort of modern era at the end of the. So, guys, do you see why I love this episode so much? Why John
that episode was just terrific. It was so terrific. And for that reason, like, it was really the episode where you just you see the storyline of this artist, truly beginning her journey, because before this, like, she hasn't really decided to, or she's starting to flirt with the idea of beginning this journey, and this is sort of the beginning of the journey. And you see, like, those first obstacles that any artist goes through as they're trying to understand what are the steps, what do I do, how do I even get to the next stage of this, what is the next stage of this.
And then she envisions herself at the Copa in Red Skelton's place, and then you see, and that look on her face, you see that that's it. She's found her goal, or she's sort of got, and she's so goal oriented to begin with. Like the whole thing about, oh, I study so hard, you should see my binders and all that stuff. Like she's, it's like she's hit upon the pinnacle of what she feels like she can achieve.
Yeah, what I think is interesting there, though, is that if we're going to be real about sort of the journey of the creative, those types of goals and what is a pinnacle, they often do start to change and shift as you make your way. And so I'm curious to find out whether or not that, if that really truly stays, a sort of pinnacle for her, or if she starts to understand that it isn't quite so linear. Yeah.
That's a good point, that it's like she's skipping a lot, like to envision herself in that little pedestal, that there's a lot of steps.
Yeah, and they're not necessarily, it's not a linear path to that. And because of it, because it's not a linear path, sometimes the journey actually, parts of the path like illuminate new pinnacles that you suddenly see, like, oh, there's that too, that could also be like the ultimate goal. I mean, very often an example, an actor's pinnacle usually begins, if they begin, at a young age as an actor, they usually are weighing it against what they see on television or what they see in the movies, right? Oh, I want to be up there on the silver screen. And then you begin that path and you realize that the path to getting to that silver screen or that little screen is really complex and complicated. And you start to see other pinnacles along the way, like, oh, maybe my pinnacle is actually Broadway, and I want to, be on a stage in front of, people every night. Like, maybe you realize, like, oh wow, the sound of applause is really powerful. And I love it more than this idea that I had when I was 18 years old that I wanted to be, or in my teens, that I wanted to be on the movie screen. And that's sort of what I mean. Like, you start to like, oh, maybe at some point you realize, like, oh my gosh, I'm a really great mentor and I enjoy, being a mentor. And you realize, like, wait, maybe that's my pinnacle, And so I think it's really interesting that she's imagined herself at the Copa. It's such a huge leap from where she is now that I can't help weigh it against sort of my own journey as a creative and understand that, like, yeah, there are pinnacles that I had when I was much younger that have changed and shifted as my journey as a creative has shifted. And so I hope that we get into that, because I think that would be a really interesting and realistic way of depicting her journey, which I already think, just in these first episodes is just so spot on with how a creative makes their way through. And this episode just, seemed to be the one that focused the most on that beginning of the creative journey. Ooh, loved it. Just loved it.
I'm so glad. Do we, at this point, get people up on the couch? I see a little icon.
Yes, we can.
I don't think we ever closed
anybody
the
that, I mean, we didn't close out the couch, so anybody can come up at any time. But yes, everybody.
Please come on up. Join us up here on the couch for a lively discussion about this very awesome episode.
I got a question.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm hosting the next one.
Mm-hmm.
So where do I find the opening script for the?
Oh, don't worry. We'll get that. We'll get that to you in Discord. There are a couple links to it.
But actually, John, is it okay for me to?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. I actually, because I'm so nuts and I was so nervous and everything, I actually copied and pasted into a Google Doc, which I can put the link to it, like, open to all on that Discord thread, the preamble. I think it's called the preamble. And
Kim just
so that,
tag me in it.
Yes, absolutely. And that way, if you're like me and need to print things out, you can do that.
So does everybody know about the Dionne Quintuplets?
Oh, that's the Canadian. Know what
that's our Canadian connection. The Dionne Quintuplets are from Ontario, actually about an hour north from where I live, and it was kind of like almost like a cult following, I guess, because they're the first quintuplets that are known to have survived infancy, and so obviously it was very prominent in the news. And I don't know if you guys noticed, part of when Midge was scanning her new/old bedroom, there was a picture of the Quints, and then it was like something that said like the Dionne Quintuplets fan club or something, that she was a member.
Yes, and I remember hearing that it was like one of the 50s fads, sort of, but it was a trend thing to do, to follow their every exploit, and their every exploit was documented. And they wrote a book about how
Midge, because they were born in 1934. So she has probably followed them most of their lives.
right, that would be almost her exact same age, similar.
Yeah, and it's kind of a point of shame on Ontario government history, but essentially they became wards of the province, and the government kind of took advantage of them and almost paraded them around for monetary gain, kind of almost like they were a circus act.
So how do we then analyze the title as the disappointment of the Dionne Quintuplets?
I'm glad you brought that
trying
up
to get through there.
because I'm not sure.
No, Rose says to her, the Dionne Quintuplets would be very, very disappointed in you. She said,
I missed it.
Yes, and I think, I can't remember what the context was, but I think it might have been when it could have been. I think it was during the final, or one of the final scenes when she comes home, and I think that it was one of those things where parents would say to their kids, "What would the Dionne Quintuplets think of this?" You know, and so I mean, I believe that's what that was all about.
Interesting. Now, one of the Quints was actually quite religiously devout and was actually pursuing becoming a nun. But she died at a young age. She died in 54. So I wonder if there's a bit of parallel with that, like that she was this, I mean, I realize that they're not Catholic, but this fact that she was a good Catholic girl that followed the rules. And
Right, that there was sort of a sanctity to them.
Well, I'm also like, I just kind of pulled it up, and there's a great article from a couple of years ago in Time magazine about sort of comparing the quintuplets to like sort of the early influencers, you know, where like you got a lot of moms on Instagram now, like, you know, using their children to sort of sell products and live the best life type of thing. So I'm kind of, you know, I guess people were looking to the quintuplets as like, you know, sort of these model kids, you know, and how to raise children correctly and how to live the best with a ton of marketing attached for different products. And they apparently were used to sell lots and lots of products, like, you know, like from big companies like Palmolive and Colgate and Lysol and all these different big products. And she does say something in one of is it the Jane Jacobs rally speech about like magazines selling us stuff, you know?
Yes,
I think there's like some kind of connection there.
And all of that promotion that they did, like that was all the government that benefited from that.
Yeah, interesting.
Which is
well, and I think
there was a lawsuit at some point. I don't know at what point in their lives, and like between the 5 of them, well, I guess 4 of them, because the one died early. Like they got like a measly like 2.8 million in compensation, which is absurd. But yeah.
Well, I think there's a comment going on in this episode about, you know, what women are sort of sold as like the right type of life, you know, because she does make that comment about the magazine selling different products to them, to women, because that's how magazines functioned, was selling household and beauty and health related products mostly to women. And and then you have her mother, sort of putting a lot of pressure on her about how she's living. And I don't know, I just think that, Midge is finding this counterculture, and she's finding this sort of rejection of typical female motherly life. And I think maybe that's why the quintuplets is why they named the episode this, or they put it in the forefront of everyone's mind, is because like that was a moment where, marketing to women for products to live a fantastic picture perfect life was, that was like a big moment for that type of thing. So I feel like Midge in this episode is really starting to reject that life and all of that, sort of succumbing to typical housewife behavior and typical housewife life. And honestly, like going into the the apartment, in Joel's apartment, she's looking around and being like, oh look, like the replacement to me, like, my replacement has all the trappings of that life, has all these sort of magazine perfect trappings of the life that I was living. And I don't know, I think I'd have to like think about it more, but there's definitely like a comment there on like typical womanhood versus what Midge is trying to do in 1950.
And yeah, I agree with all of that. And I will add that it all is occurring as she is moving into her parents' house, which is also not only making her, at this time that she is rejecting a lot of that mindset, she's also having to live under her parents' roof. And that is having an infant, I don't know how to pronounce this word, but it's making her feel like a kid again. And that is echoed in some of the things some of the shots we've seen, and some of the, I don't know, that she's also, having to think about, what it means to join her parents, to live under her parents' roof again.
Yeah, and then that's so interesting because like she's listening to the record and feels like she's in trouble and comes home late and like all that stuff. There's also like another interesting juxtaposition with Jane Jacobs, because Jane Jacobs was a housewife, quote unquote, who was making a lot of trouble for politicians in the city. And she was definitely like, the little housewife that had a big voice and was, and ultimately, won in stopping some pretty major construction through New York City, and really did change the way that people think about cities and how they function. And, so I think it's really interesting that like they put her in this episode where Midge is trying to make a decision about what kind of woman she's going to be. And, the criticism of Jane Jacobs too was she was just a housewife that, just had a big mouth, you know what I mean? And I kind of feel like that's kind of what Midge is doing too, is that she's breaking out of that role that's been decided for her. And she's at this kind of crossroads of, what am I going to do? And then at the end of the day, she's living in her parents' house. It's like, there's a lot going on there.
It's true. This episode addresses so much, and it's at the middle of the series, or the middle of this first season.
Yeah.
And so it combines the social aspects of things and then also the personal aspects of things. And and we haven't really seen, I mean, we've seen them, of course, outside the family, but this is where we see we see her going out and really developing herself, as a comedian, and really, really dealing with that process and with Susie. And that's the other thing I love about this episode, is that friendship that's developing, even though Susie says we're not friends. But the tenderness between them, that when you guys were talking about them falling in love, but that scene in the hot dog stand, and even before that, that sort of like, here, stand on this crate and now you can see, and I don't know. I just think that the development of the friendship and the relationship, the dynamics, like you guys said in the watch, that is only going to get stronger and more multifaceted, I believe, moving forward.
Yeah, I love it. And I mean, I'm, of course, I get the idea that these two can be friends, and that, and there's something beautiful and deep about just a platonic friendship. But I was just sort of commenting on this idea that, like, just my own inclination whenever I see two characters really getting along well together is that I just personally go to romance. That's sort of why that's also the reason why I immediately went to romance with Midge and Lenny in previous episodes. Same thing, it's mostly just like the excitement that you have for these characters feeling those emotions, those butterfly feelings of love. And I totally am on. I get what Lee was wanting there.
Yeah, and I think that with Lenny also, and with Susie, she's doing things that you would do on a date,
exactly,
that she's, especially that I didn't get a chance to talk during episode 3, but yes, to you guys had brought something up about what is going to happen between them, or what is happening between them, because no spoilers, but what that relationship is. This is actually, I think, the first episode that we don't see him in, I think. Is that right? Of all the so far in the series.
Yeah, he was in every other episode, I think.
Right. So, and I think that's also, like, I think that might have been purposeful too, to say, okay, look at all these other comedians.
Wait, you're talking about Lenny.
Yeah. Look,
yeah, exactly.
So episode 4 is all about what else is happening in the comedy world.
Yes.
In 1958.
And
right?
I love that juxtaposition between, like, weird, abstract, shithole basement act with this, like, upscale club with this, like, polished performer, like, going from, like, the suicide ventriloquist to, like, this, like, I just thought that was such a really brilliant way of sort of showing us in just 2 scenes the scope of this scene. I mean, it really got me, like, I've never really been into stand-up. Like, that's never been, an area that I've had a lot of interest in. And watching the show gets me kind of interested in understanding all of the nuances of that whole scene.
What's also,
and especially at this point.
Yeah, totally. I mean, but what's also really interesting is that they go to all those different acts, right? They go to all those really different types of places too. So, starting with the record store, they go to the basement to find the cool stuff. the real nerdy stuff, right? And she finds that hilarious, that album. Like, she's laughing so hard. Then they go to the weird ventriloquist where, like, no one else is laughing, but then they actually get it. Like, they get what he's doing. And there's a cool factor there that they understand the sophisticated humor that he's doing, and nobody else seems to. And then they go to the bigger club, the horribly colored wall club, where there's a slightly more famous comic and everyone's laughing, but they're not really. Like, they're kind of like smiling along, like, oh yeah, that was a good one, and they're really there for the scene and the booker and all of that. And then they go to the Copa, where everybody is just on the floor laughing, at like mediocre jokes again. But I think it's really interesting that that's where Midge sees herself. Like, she sees herself as that type of star. And, whereas I'm kind of like, yeah, but you spent the whole night more appreciating the weirder comedy. Like, like she definitely seemed to find the little, like, the more offbeat stuff super duper funny, and you would think that that's what she would gravitate toward. But I think by the end of the night, she kind of gets starry-eyed about what it could mean to be a stand-up comic as a female performer, and performing at a place that she frequented as a rich woman of society. I think there's something going on there too.
But that kind of gets back to what I was saying before, is that pinnacles change and shift over the course of the creative journey. She spends enough time with indie comics that kind of reject the Red Skeleton thing. She spends enough time in that scene, and that you just start to create new goals that are completely different from, I want to be at the Copa. I mean, that is a thing that happens on the creative journey. Now, I'm not saying that that's going to happen to her. I mean, there are plenty of artists who go on a really wild creative journey that has them passing through all kinds of different lands, and still they keep their eye on the prize. They never veer off of the thing. They see the Oscar. They are going to get that Oscar, and it doesn't matter, where they pass before then. That's totally true. But I think that there's just as many artists who discover new pinnacles along the way.
And I think we sort of see the development, or we see more details about Midge's process when she goes to the record. I love the record store scene so much.
Oh my gosh! I mean, I kind of got excited to want to go to a record store. I'm excited. I want to go to any store right now.
The day is young.
But the best stuff is always hidden in the basement or up in the upper corner room.
Yeah. Well, I want to go to Amoeba Records. Does anybody know about Amoeba?
Yes,
I've heard of it.
I've been to the one in San Francisco. It's like the size of a city block. The one is the one in LA like that too.
Yeah, it's the same. They're massive. They're just these massive, just a wonderland of warehouse, a wonderland of just records and movies and just everything. They're incredible, and they also
that sounds overwhelming to me.
It is.
We have one here.
Overwhelming.
And they also do shows. So you'll if you go on a certain day, you'll see a live act playing. And legit live acts. Sometimes big acts will be playing there, just on a Monday afternoon or something.
We went to a record store in Brooklyn like that, John. And right now I can't think of the name of it, but it had a pretty cool record store bookshop. Plus they had a space for live music. And
Amoeba's a different vibe from what we're seeing here in the show. I would love to go in something like this, a little open the door, a little ring on the, a little bell ringing on the door as you walk in. And
there's a store cat. There's a cat.
Yeah, there's a store cat. There's a store cat. There's everything is really, all on top of, everything's on top of itself, stacked all the way to the ceiling, and there's some weird little stairway down. That I would just absolutely love to go to right now. We don't have many of those. We have some bookstores like that in LA, but we don't have really many of those.
When you go visit your sister, John, there's one of those in Vegas that Jason and I went to. The place is packed, floor to ceiling, wall to wall, every room.
Oh, cool.
And this guy and his son own it. It's insane. If you look at my
I mean, you can find that. You can usually find that in any big city. They're just you kind of have to look for them.
But it's
there's nothing around me. It's like that.
Size of a 2-bedroom house. This record store.
Oh, that's super cool.
Yeah, it's great. I think it was called Trax Records or Wax Trax. Anyway,
I love places like that. You could spend a whole day.
Yeah, in Chicago, we had a really great one for years that when I was living there called Reckless Records. That I want to say it was either High Fidelity, I think High Fidelity or Wicker Park, one of those two movies. Like there's a record store in it that is basically based on I believe based on Reckless Records.
Gotta be High Fidelity.
Yeah, probably High Fidelity. I think Wicker Park has it in there too, or has something in there. I think I don't know. I haven't seen either of the movies, but yeah, same thing. Just like I just miss it. I just really miss it. The area I live in Los Angeles has none of that at all. So watching the show really, like, I think that's also another reason why I love this show so very much. It is that urban world is a world I'm realizing how much I truly miss.
And I like when they show the outliers, the sort of outsiders of the society. She lives in this glossy, part of this glossy apartment. But then I love when they show these sort of grungy or authentic places that what we now call independently owned.
Well, what's really interesting is that I mentioned it in the show. I lived in an apartment that was that exact layout in Chicago, which must have been a very popular design back in the, I would imagine that the apartment that I lived in was, sort of, I'm sure that it was built sometime in the 30s, somewhere between the 20s to the 50s, right? As these were.
What they call pre-war, right? Pre-war.
Yeah, pre-war. They all have that, like, I think it's like what, boxcar design, where it's just like everything just goes in, a straight sort of narrow chute back to the end of the building. There's usually a long hallway somewhere that takes you into individual bedrooms along the hallway. And then at the very front of the house is where you have that one big room that they were dancing in during the New Year's. And then it always has an archway that leads into a dining room-ish or another room there area that you're in before you hit hallways and stuff. And I lived in one of those. Actually, it was an apartment that I lived in. Sean Gunn also lived in that same apartment. We lived in it at different times, but then we also were roommates in another apartment that was like right after that. But this one that I'm thinking of is in an area of Chicago called Lincoln Park, which is has a lot more upscale brownstones and there's a bit more money in that area, and yet it's an area of the town that's that's set. There's a university there, DePaul University, where I went. So it's like the college town part of Chicago. So there are a lot of students that live there. And what's interesting is that that building that we lived in, it was just all students who lived in all of these apartments, and I lived with 3 other roommates in a place like that. And now looking at this, I'm convinced that the apartment I lived in was once lived in by people of their status. There's no question about it. Like, thinking about that look, it was probably, a upper middle class, a building that, an apartment that was for upper middle class. But by now, by like the 90s, when we were there, it was a total grungy apartment, So it was really interesting to see how that, how it can transform and all of that time, just, in my own mind, thinking about that. I'm sure that that's the case in New York City as well. Like, plenty of apartments that, like, at one time were very, the obviously the layout hasn't changed, so it's still the same apartment, but just,
Well, I lived in an apartment not far from, like, literally like a few blocks, maybe a 5-minute walk from where the Weissmans live. All those buildings were built in, early 1900s, or like, between 1900 1950. And they were, like the apartment I lived in was definitely, you could tell, had been sectioned off at a certain point, right? So that's what happens, is that those apartments don't exist as entire households anymore.
Yeah.
You have like one or two on the floor. You have many on the floor, because all they've done is
they've divided them.
They've divided them. So
we were living in one that was not divided. It was, the whole building, all of the apartment. It was that there were 3 floors, so that means that there were 3 apartments, and they were all just big, long apartments. And I never really thought much about that. I was just like, there's just like a bunch of us students living in each one, and we could all afford, because we were all splitting the rent, 4 ways. But I never really thought about it. That apartment was for a family, like, and it definitely had a family living in it, at that time in the 50s, that likely had the same dynamic that we're seeing here. And I just had not thought about that at all. It had this fireplace that, like, I mean, we never used. It was just there in the wall, and I never thought about, like, well, there was a time when when like a Christmas, there was a family sitting around the fireplace here in this room, that we don't even look at that fireplace. It seems so out of place in our world right now.
Speaking of the apartment, how about that opening scene, huh? Huh?
I love that opening scene.
That was awesome. Technically it was beautiful,
impeccable, perfect.
but it was also a very emotional scene.
Oh God, I still, like I said, I still can't watch it. Even today, I can't watch it without crying, because it depicts the life of a marriage, and the evolution of a marriage. And I'm just gonna get choked up just talking about it now, and how her parents were involved, and that whole scene of bringing the baby home. I mean, if you've ever
brought a baby home,
experienced that moment, and the choice of that song. See, I didn't want to say this before, but how about the choice of that song that has such uplifting lyrics, but such a devastatingly melancholy arrangement, and her voice when you go back and rewatch it, as I recommend you do, what happens to her voice at the end of the song, and then what happens in the scene with the what's that called, like the zoom out, I don't know the technical terms, but where you see her with the amazing view of the river behind her, and the widening of the shot, is just, it's just
beautiful.
Yeah.
It also, what's so beautiful about that scene is how it really shows the full scope of their marriage without judgment over Joel. Like, is the main thing, because we're, this is Midge's story. It's very easy for the writing to pass judgment over Joel, as we've seen in so many of these episodes. And to see that scene and just see, like, you know, there was a time when things were good, and we just experience it as it was, without any comment on it, other than these two were once in love, and things worked between them, and these were the moments where they worked best. Of course, juxtaposed with where they are now is what makes that scene so very sad.
I was still internally judging. I made up for the lack of monologue in my head.
You were internally judging him during these old scenes where their marriage was in a different place.
Well, yeah, in the sense of, like, I was kind of reflecting on it in, this is what he left, you know? This is his family and what they built. So yeah, I looked at it in a very sad light, rather than, oh, look, they were happy. I was like,
oh, well, I certainly wasn't happy. I just think that, like, they could have shown other moments from their life. It's not like their life was just completely,
oh, I agree,
hunky-dory all the time. They just happened to show moments where the two were working together, where the two were, like, where things were collaborative, right? We're playing a game together. We're both walking away from the baby together. We both brought the baby home together. There was a togetherness that they chose to focus on that juxtaposes really well. And of course, that is what makes you sad about it. And of course, Joel is a huge reason why everything has sort of fallen apart.
They could have shown them fighting, like Midge crying. I agree with you. They could have shown, like, to make it sad in that sense, they could have shown very specifically bad moments, but they chose to balance it.
They could have shown Joel. They could have shown them fighting. They could have shown Joel doing really dumb things during the marriage, but they also could have done the opposite. They could have glorified Joel. They could have shown Joel doing really amazing things. I'm saying they didn't even do that. They showed the two of them in, like, equally doing things together. They showed a partnership, rather than, like, either of the two of them, in one way or the other. And then they show a solitude, like, they show partnership and they show solitude. And those are the things that are juxtaposed with one another. That's what makes the scene so very sad, of course, because you recognize that any relationship is vulnerable, like that even in a relationship where you do have that, like, thing that is just clicking, that like anything, it is vulnerable, and that's a scary thought, and that's a sad thought to see, especially in the context of it already happening.
And I think also that the framing of it was such that it was really her memory, that sort of her memories flooding back. And if you've ever had to leave a place for good forever, that you do have those memories of, what you experienced.
And they showed the empty, they showed the empty and then moving in, and then they showed it full, and then they showed their life, and then they showed it empty again.
Oh yeah.
And they're looking back, and that was another thing that I liked about that.
Yeah, there's something about loss in general, like loss of a person, a death, whatnot, that just immediately causes this replay thing to happen in your mind, where you suddenly just replay everything about that place, about that person, and you usually do actually focus on the good things, the things that you remember happily about that. I remember, I lived in my last apartment before Babsy and I moved to our new house, lived there for 16 years here in Los Angeles.
Oh, damn.
And I remember leaving that place. It was a really interesting little bungalow, 1920s bungalow in East Los Angeles. And I remember like never thinking much about the fact that I was living at that place. And then when we moved out, you know, and like cleaning it all out, and then I remember the final, like walking out of the apartment, I just had this flood of memories of everything that I had experienced in that entire apartment for 16 years. The roommates that I had, the parties that were held. It was just like suddenly like I couldn't help it. It's just like a flash before my eyes, all of this stuff. I got really, really, really sad because so many of the memories were so good. And it was a really like bizarre feeling, but that's a thing.
Well,
that's a thing that happens.
What's really funny too, and also you could say it was rare I was there. I remember it all too well, but I'm just gonna say that.
Oh yeah.
Now, why would you do that? Why would you do that to us?
But I think what's really interesting too is that, you know, places do, especially a home, they do have a real hold on our memories, right? Because everything that we do, if we remember the place we were in, it's really specific. And all of those memories that she chooses to remember are not only with Joel, but with her family, like, you know, her children, her chosen family, her friends, you know, they're all in that place and all remembered very fondly as she's cleaning the place out. And the cool thing is that they show her now moving into her childhood bedroom and catching the eye, like catching her eye, seeing the Dionne Quintuplets, you know, little plaque there, the little newspaper clipping. And that's sort of a memory of her childhood as well, because she probably had that on the wall and like her room hasn't changed that much, right? So I think it's really interesting that now she's in her childhood bedroom. And if you've ever like gone home for Thanksgiving and slept in your childhood bedroom, you know, like that's another sense of place with a lot of memories attached that puts you in a completely different mindset. And you know, you see her in the beginning like ordering around all the people moving things out of her apartment, and then, you know, laying on the floor in her childhood bedroom listening to a record. It's like, you know, there's two different Midges going on here in terms of the place that she's in, and I think that's really cool.
Forgive me, but when you said that, I couldn't help thinking about the Saturday Night Live song that they do about bringing their boyfriends home to sleep in their childhood bed.
That's a good one. It's a good one.
If you haven't seen, and then they did a sequel about going home for Thanksgiving, Back Home Ballers, and they're all dressed up very fancy, and then they go home to their mom and dad, and their mom serves them, you know, waits on them hand and foot. I'm sorry, that was a little digression, but
funny.
Yeah,
that is a thing, and I mean, I'm many decades past that stage myself, but I do remember that thing of going home and seeing all the stuff that I'd put on the walls, and I don't know, maybe there are people among us who have that even now.
We're kind of out of time, but if you ever want to hear me talk about Jane Jacobs, I have a lot to say. And her book is like literally prominently on my shelf. It's like one of the best things I ever read when I was in grad school. So highly recommend The Death and Life of Great American Cities if you have time.
Oh, cool. I'm going to be heading out now, but maybe that's something that we can talk about, because you mentioned that you have a lot to say during the scene. So I was like, oh, cool. I would like to. The event, the gab session that you're doing on Maisel, refresh us on what that's going to cover.
I put together, you know, I think we should all just talk about New York City, 1958, and talking about all of the, you know, or some of the, you know, the socioeconomic stuff going on there, the cultural stuff going on there, both as like, you know, the Maisels and the Weissmans being a Jewish family versus, you know, other people in their socioeconomic class, maybe, you know, how that relates to where they are and what they're doing and how they live, but also some of the history and, you know, we're only 4 episodes in, so there's a lot more that we'll be able to talk about that you just don't know about yet. But I just thought it'd be fun to like explore the time and place that Midge is in, and you know, just sort of set it up that way that we could all chat about the historical context.
I love that.
Awesome. That's
Yeah,
so exciting. Maybe we can talk a little bit
We
about.
should close this room out because Lee's got her event starting right at 2, and I don't want to interfere with that.
Thank you,
Yes.
guys.
Wonderful. This was amazing. This was an amazing episode and one of my favorite post-show discussions.
Thanks for giving us an awesome episode.
Yes, thank you, John. You have no
well,
idea.
I don't really know. I don't know these episodes.
I bet you didn't know you were giving the Canadian connection.
or the person.
I really don't. I mean,
Barbara Streisand fan that.
it's all just sort of written in the stars.
I was just saying, I was like, it's written in the stars.
Okay, well, in that case, I'm all in.
All right, everybody, this was great. I'll
Thank
see you
you,
all very
guys.
soon
Thanks,
on
all
the
of you.
Discords, and we will be back for our next late show on Monday. Bye, everyone.
Thanks
See you
so much,
guys.
everyone.
Stay nice,
And
guys.
head on